Hello everyone, this is Dr. Jawad. Let's talk about the skin, its layers, and its function. Now when it comes to the skin, there's three separate layers. You have your outer layer, which is the epidermis. Underneath the epidermal layer is the dermal layer. And then underneath the dermal layer is the hypodermis, or otherwise known as the subcutaneous layer. So when it comes to the skin layers and its functions, we have this outside layer, called the epidermal layer. One of the functions of the epidermal layer is protection. Okay, it acts as a protective barrier from the external environment, meaning that it protects us from the wind, the pathogens, any type of external potential harm and threat that could harm the body. Next, prevents water loss and gain. So we have a sealant in the epidermal layer. It has cells called keratinocytes. Keratinocytes produces a protein called keratin. Now, keratin to the skin, what that does, that enables us as a sealant. It allows us to be waterproof from the keratin. Keratin is one of the body's very, very strong proteins. Next, metabolic regulation. This is where you're out and about, and this is how you absorb. So what happens when you're out and about and you have sunlight? You've got the UV light, the UV rays coming from the sun. The skin absorbs it, which then transfers down through the liver and kidney pathway to produce vitamin D. So the skin doesn't actually produce vitamin D. It just is a precursor for the UV light to make vitamin D in our system. Now, one of the things, melanocytes, you have these spiky cells in the basement layer protecting the DNA. It's called melanocytes. Now, melanocytes produces a cell called melanin. Now, we all have the same number of melanocytes. However, melanin, this is what gives the skin its color and its response to the UV lights. So, when you're taking in more of the UV light, what happens? We produce more melanin. This is what gives skin its darker color. If you're taking in less UV light, what's going to happen? Your skin's going to produce less melanin. So we all have the same number of melanocytes. It's just that melanin differs in according to skin tone. Next, secretion and absorption. This is secretion and absorption, so we have absorption. This allows our skin, if we put like a chemical on there, if we hurt ourselves, like an Aspercream, like a Bengay, or like a pain patch or a nicotine patch, we do have glands on the outside of the skin which allows us for absorption. In addition, if we're sweating, if we're hot, again, it allows us for secretion of the oils through the skin. Next, immune function. We have to protect the inside from the outside. How? We have these cells in the epidermal layer called dendritic cells. These are macrophages. This is part of your immune response. And macrophages are just big eaters. They're just going to engulf anything. What? Everything. Any type of harmful substance that is a potential threat to the system. This is why we're allowed to go and walk through the forest or walk anywhere and have our immune system active. This is why we need to be outside. This is why we need to interact with people. Because if we don't interact with people, we're not going to get the external environment, the pathogens, to build up our immune system. So then once we bypass the epidermal layer, then we get down to the dermis layer, the dermal layer. So how do you know if you bypass the epidermal layer and you hit the dermal layer? Very simple. Did you draw blood? Once you draw blood, then it bypassed the epidermal layer. Okay, now we're in the dermis layer. So the functions of the dermal layer, one is temperature regulation. We have the arteries, the veins, we have the nerves, we have glands. So what happens is that temperature regulation through the blood vessels, so what happens when you get hot? The blood vessels dilate. What happens when you get cold? The blood vessels constrict, okay, for temperature regulation. In addition, we have sweat glands. So when you're too hot, what happens? We have the sebum, sebaceous glands, okay, that when you get hot, they produce an oil. The oil comes out through the gland, gets on the top of your skin, and due to the cold air, it cools us down. Next, secretion and absorption. Same concept. Okay? Because we have these glands, we also have, again, a regulatory system that if we get too hot and so forth and so on, or we have certain musks that we give out, pheromones, through the glandular system. Sebum, sweat glands also do electrolytes. So when you're sweating, this is why when you're sweating, again, you lose a lot of electrolytes if you're too hot. Sensory receptors. There's a lot of sensory receptors, and these are the green guys. And there's different sensory receptors in accordance to what type of stimulus is being thrown upon it. Is it touch, light touch, deep touch? Is it temperature, hot and cold? Pain receptors, the nociceptors, the chemoreceptors, the baroreceptors. So they're all really regulated through these sensory receptors in the dermal layer. And then underneath the dermal layer, we have the hypodermis, the subcutaneous layer, which is a lot of the adipose tissue. You have some arteries, you have some veins in there. Okay? So let's talk about the different layers of the epidermis. Okay, so let's talk about the layers of the epidermis, which is the outside layer. So you have the epidermal layer, you have the dermal layer, and then you have the subcutaneous layer or the hypodermal layer. And this is my dog Chester. He has to be in the video. If not, he's just going to be barking in the background. So hope you can bear with it. So let's talk about the layers of the epidermis. So initially there's 4 layers of the epidermis. Yes, there are 5, but I'll get to that at the end. So the layers of the epidermis is that the outer layer, which is the protective barrier layer, and it's the most superficial layer, and it's mostly, actually it's all flat dead cells. So this is why if you scratch your skin, it's just flaking out dead skin cells. There is no it's not live tissue. Yes, they have a keratin as a protein, which does make it waterproof, and you can see that is the outermost layer and it acts as a protective barrier. So let's get down to the next layer, which is, it looks like granules. It's granule. Stratum granulosum. Yes, it has appearance of granules. Now, it's the next layer down. And the thing is that, why is it granules? Because when new skin's growing, it's actually growing from the bottom up. So it does have an active to a layer of dead cells. And what it is, the cells are just flattened organelles. So this is the transitional layer between the active layer and the dead cell layer, which is the stratum granulosum. Underneath that layer, it's a spiny appearance. These cells look like they have spines to them. Hence the name, the stratum spinosum. Now, the thing is, the many cells are still going under cell division, because remember, the cells grow from the bottom up. Now, the reason why they're spine in appearance is because they contain thick tonal filaments, which gives it that strength and flexibility. So you can see here, it is a very, very thick layer. And it's a very, very strong layer. This is why skin is very, very strong. Skin is a very, very strong organ of the body because of the stratum spinosum layer. Now, underneath is the deepest layer because we're looking from the bottom down. Superficial to deep. And it's called the stratum basal layer, which is the deepest layer. I call it the basement layer. The thing about the basement layer is that this is where cell division takes place, and new cells grow from the bottom up. So the new cells are constantly pushing the old cells up. Now, the thing about the basement layer is if that's destroyed, then new cells cannot grow. So let's say you cut your skin and you bypass the basement layer and you draw blood. Well, that layer of blood, that's the dermal layer because you have the arteries and veins down there. New cells cannot grow, so this is where you get scar tissue. So if you ever cut yourself deep, new cells are not going to grow. Yeah, this is where the scar tissue forms because you bypass this basement layer. Now, there is another layer, and it's only on areas where there's no hair. So you're looking at the palms of your hands and the bottom of your feet. And that's called the stratum lucidum, or lucidum. And it's only found in thick skin and hairless. So it's right underneath the stratum corneum, but above the stratum granulosum. Where? On the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet. Now the thing about this layer, it's very thick. And that thickened layer is flattened dead keratinocytes. And this is what makes your palms and your feet really waterproof. So essentially there is only four layers of the epidermis. Add one more depending on where it's at, the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet. So you got the stratum corneum, stratum granulosum, stratum spinosum, and stratum basal layer. Palms of the hands and bottom of the feet, you have the stratum lucidum. Okay? Thank you very much. Okay, one more thing. He reminded me, I forgot one thing. So with all the layers of the skin, how are you going to memorize all this stuff? Because it's not that easy. You're learning a foreign language. So the phrase, come let's get sunburned. This is how you memorize it from the top down. Come, stratum corneum, let's, stratum lucidum, get, stratum granulosum, sun, stratum spinosum, burned, stratum basal layer. The 4 plus 5 layers of the skin, remember the stratum lucidum is on the palms of the hand and the bottom of the feet. So come let's get sunburned. Thank you. Leave any comments down below and sign off, Chester. We're going to go for a walk. Take care.